Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you've all had a great lunch, and we're here to have a huge challenge ahead of us. And that is, after such a wonderful lunch, how we're going to keep you awake. And I hope to do that by having a session called Evaluation Headlines. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, ADB's Independent Evaluation Department apparently, and this was before my time, had a check-in of all the evaluation heads online and trying to see what are the main issues and headlines for evaluation. And it was done periodically, it was well received. And we have actually two of those people who were there at the time, Marvin and Veronique, with us, to tell us what are these headlines as we see it. So we're going to try to make this as conversational as possible. It's going to be just a free-flowing session on from heads of evaluation of admittedly a smaller constituency than is represented in this whole conference. These are heads of independent evaluations from multilateral development banks. So keep that in mind. But we're trying to make sure that there are headlines that might resonate across all of the other groups here in this session. So I have with me my colleagues, Veronique Salzilazak, Chief Evaluator of EBRD, Ashwani Muthu, Director General of the Independent Evaluation Office of the New Development Bank, NDB, and Marvin Taylor Dormand, Managing Director, Complaints Resolution, Evaluation, and Integrity Unit of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So let me start with just a very quick round from each of you from your point of view, as we now look ahead over the next 5 years. What is the one headline that you think we as evaluators ought to be considering over the next 5 years? So, Veronique, can I start with you?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Manny, and really delighted to be here with all of you today. Well, for the coming years, I would say we should definitely look back and see what we learned from the past. And what we learned from the past, especially during the COVID crisis, was that evaluation, to continue to be relevant and to continue to be useful, had to be agile and flexible. So looking ahead, I definitely would recommend that we continue to be agile and flexible. That means that we adapt our methodology, our approaches, so that we bring the evidence-based evaluation evidence that our colleagues need, that our clients need, and that the community needs.
Great, thanks. Ashwani.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. Building on what Veronique mentioned, I think moving forward, it's fundamental that evaluation is timely. Timely in two senses. Firstly, in terms of the topics that are chosen for evaluation, that we make sure we choose the most relevant topic that can contribute to inducing change in our institutions and in our member countries. But timely also in terms of how we deliver those evaluations and the timeliness in terms of delivering those evaluations. In the past, I think you'll probably relate to this fact that evaluations took quite a bit of time to be delivered, and I think we have to be much more quicker in that sense. So I think I would focus on the timeliness from two dimensions for now.
Thanks, Ashwani. Marvin.
To me, the headline going forward is, as you have heard me say in other occasions, evaluation has to be consequential. For evaluation to be consequential, it has to be good in times of crisis, good in normal times. It has to be good for decision making. It has to be good for learning. It has to adapt and incorporate the new technologies that are available there. Many of these that we are not yet incorporating and we can talk more about this.
I'm sure we will. Let me come back then on this issue of agility, flexibility, timeliness that Ashwani and Veronique mentioned. Marvin and Veronique, in the session just before lunch, we actually spent an hour and a half talking about a lot of the benefits of real-time evaluation, and a little bit, perhaps not as much time as we should have, on also what are the challenges for that. Just a quick summary, if you may, of some of those issues that were discussed in the last session on especially the challenges of being agile, flexible, and timely. So I'll go with Veronique and Marvin first, and then maybe Shimon, if you have any reflections, that would be good. But Veronique.
Well, one of the key challenges when you use the methodology that are like real-time assessment, real-time evaluation, rapid assessment, is that time is key. Usually when you are in evaluation, you have the luxury of time. You wait for a while for the projects and the programs to mature, and then you come ex post. And even the evaluator usually has also a few months to evaluate, to collect all of the evidence, and to then base analysis on this evidence. Of course, when it's real-time assessment, first, it's an ongoing process. So the data is being generated as you are evaluating it. So that's definitely a challenge. A second challenge is that you have also to be quick in delivering. Exactly what Ashwani was saying, we need to provide findings quite early so that it can fit into the decision making. So the time is different. It's a challenge as well as an opportunity. And collection of data is always a challenge, and even more so in real-time evaluation.
Great.
There are more challenges, but I will leave my colleagues to continue.
That's plenty for us. Marvin.
Well, talking about being consequential when you conduct your evaluation work, a lot of money is put into these activities. If we are not consequential, you better put the money in projects. So a good example of being consequential is what we went through recently in ADB that you were asking as a follow-up to what we said a moment ago, in which time we adapted our evaluation work together with Veronique and the great team that you have there, Manny. We adapted so that we would continue having an impact in the institution. With an eye in the long term, we didn't abandon the idea of the long term. We did a lot of work on knowledge, on energy and climate change, but we also had to adapt our knowledge work, our evaluation work with real-time evaluation, about which we spoke a lot a moment ago, and we could expand on this. Knowledge work, headlines precisely come from there. Evaluation headline, this session that we're having live today was a creation of the crisis. And we produced a number of short-term notes geared towards shedding light to the new issues that were coming up there, health issues, SMEs, et cetera. So that's a good example of being consequential. Adapting your work so that you can continue contributing to your organization, and in the end, as Megan was saying early on, continue to be useful to the people who we serve.
Marvin, a quick follow-up on this. How do we know if we're being consequential or not? It's hard because we ourselves have to be accountable, as you say, to the ones who've given us the budget. But any examples do you have?
Yeah, many examples. All the board sessions are good examples of being consequential. Every time that I go to the board, always we speak with the team. How would the board know if what we have brought there, how would they know all of this information if we would have not produced this work? It is amazing, the quality of the discussion. Coming back to this example of real-time evaluation, a lot of pushback from management. Obviously, I have been in management as well. I don't want anyone to be watching me when I am running in an emergency. But we had the vision of adapting there. And some board members, one in particular, was very opposed. But after they saw the product, they were amazed. And this same board member that opposed the work became a champion. And he himself asked for extra work from us. The president asked for work from us to look into the vaccine issues. These are clear indications that you are being consequential, that you are having an impact, that they want to know from you, from that independent, objective perspective that you have and that no one else could bring to the table except for you.
Thank you. That's having repercussions, by the way, in our work program today, but we can get back to that. Ashwani, any reflection on this issue of being consequential? What does it mean for you?
I'm also going to comment on the agility issue, if you don't mind. So maybe I'll start with the consequential. I was just reflecting while Manny was speaking. I think this is fundamental. If evaluation is not consequential, then we're not making a contribution. But I want to build on what Manny said, that evaluators and evaluations can be consequential not only once the report is available, but also during the evaluation process, especially if you build in participatory processes and you build that trust and confidence in your stakeholders to be able to dialogue with them and to share with them what your thinking is about changes that need to be made to a strategy or to an operation while you're actually conducting your analysis and collecting data. And I want to give you a concrete example. I have just returned last week, I was in Henan province, please excuse me for the pronunciation, evaluating an NDB-financed metro project, a fantastic project. But in our discussion, this was the field visit, data collection, stakeholder consultation. And what the team found as we are collecting data and having consultations, that the project had monitoring systems, but they were not integrated. Different components were being managed and monitored individually. So the team in a dialogue said, look, don't you think you should have a more integrated, holistic approach to monitoring? And the project team, the counterparts, took that on board and are already taking action. So that is a consequence that you can have through evaluation during the process as well. But if I may comment on the agility point, building on what my colleagues have said, the BRICS New Development Bank, its evaluation office is relatively young, 1.5 years more or less. And also the New Development Bank itself is relatively young. We have a healthy portfolio of having financed about 100 projects for over $30 billion in 8 years, but majority of these projects are still ongoing. So we are building into our work program real-time evaluations, midterm evaluations. But based on my past experience as an evaluator, I think there are two aspects. Veronique and Marvin alluded to them already, but I would like to bring them from introduce them from a different dimension. Two of the challenges I would like to highlight of real-time evaluation. The first one, I believe, is the whole issue of participation, especially when you want really stakeholder participation. And how do you make sure that you can do that in a compressed period of time? And you really need to adjust your evaluation processes to make them more streamlined, because the evaluations do take time. So that's one of the challenges. The other challenge is, and I think Veronique mentioned, how do you really capture that field perspective? How do you in a short period of time, when you want to deliver really quickly? How do you actually, how are you able to collect primary data? How are you able to really have that wider stakeholder engagement in such situations? So I feel those are two of the challenges that we need to keep in mind moving forward.
No, it's very interesting, because that actually was brought up just in the last session that Veronique and Marvin attended. Veronique, I wanted to get back again to this issue of being consequential, that I think is really, really fundamental to what we do. And Marvin raised a very good point that one of the indicators is the board aware, and have the actions, recommendations of the evaluators been absorbed and taken up by the board? We just had a very interesting session with our board development committee in which the committee members expressed satisfaction with the evaluation, but a bit of frustration that management action wasn't forthcoming as a result. So my question to you is, how can we be consequential, not just in terms of board awareness, but in terms of management behavior? Any examples of that?
Yes, actually, I do have a good example of that, because it's very legitimate that the board, definitely the board is interested in having information that comes from an independent tool, reporting to them and bringing them information that they can use right away. But I remember when we presented the result of the real-time assessment of the COVID-19 package that EBRD implemented. We presented the results in January 2020, and at that time, the institution had already decided not to have a second package. So then you think, okay, we're coming with all of these results, and then so what? So, of course, when we heard that, we made sure that the findings were framed in a way that were using, of course, the example of COVID-19 crisis and EBRD's response to it, but that it was also framed in a way that it could be useful for other crises. And then we prepared some suggestions. The document itself, because it was real-time evaluation, was not supposed to have formal recommendations, but yet we proposed some suggestions for management. And I remember during the meeting itself, the presentation to the ARC, the Audit and Risk Committee, there was one of the board members who asked for the floor and said, okay, that's all good, but now, so what? What can we do? Because they are not formal recommendations, what can we do to make sure that management will take them into account? And at that time, I had two options for them. I say either it's voluntary and we can work with management to ensure that it's taken on board, or we agree to change these suggestions into recommendations. But we did not have time to even start the discussion, because then the next crisis happened. And in February, there was the war on Ukraine, where EBRD is very much supporting the country and investing a lot. So what happened is that at that time, both board members and management, and I would say that the fact that even management came to us to ask, but both of them came and say, okay, how can we use the suggestion based on the evidence that you collected for the package that EBRD implemented during the COVID? How can we make that more relevant for the new package that we're putting together for the response to the war in Ukraine? And we worked with management to make the suggestion practical and actionable in the new crisis, and it was integrated in the new document. So that's a real clear example of rapid learning loops. Of course, it was also because of the fact that it was very short. It was only 2 or 3 weeks after we presented the result that there was a crisis. So everybody had this suggestion in mind. But it's important that we also look at how management is taking those elements on board. And of course, we say we will have a second phase where we'll look also at how the suggestion helped, or not, maybe.
But of course, this would be true not only for rapid responses, but any kind of responses, because there are projects, new projects come on board, and so your suggestion is certainly one indicator of being consequential is that the new projects incorporate the lessons from evaluation of the older ones. So, Marvin, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I see you nodding with looking skeptical.
No, I'm not. I'm not skeptical. But I mean, I've been fortunate over my years of working in different organizations, different contexts in independent evaluation, and being rewarded with seeing the impact about this evaluation work of my team. Say, for instance, when in an organization, MIGA, right, produce an evaluation that consolidates a new product, which is the life of this organization, non-sovereign guarantees. Today, you see a consequence of your work there. When an evaluation of safeguards in ADB leads to a whole reform and inspire the reform of these safeguards and the structure of the reform of safeguards in this institution, you see the impact of this work that your team has done. When the president tells you, we would have never been able to get this result in ADF without the work that you have done. I mean IED, you see the impact of and consequences of your work. And I could see it there in the discussion with the different representatives deciding on whether they provide more funding or not to ADF. When the president asks you during the crisis, can you please take a look at vaccines, the way we are doing our work in vaccine, because there seems to be an issue. The president himself, right, you see a consequence of the work that you have done. You gain the trust via the work that you did before, and now he himself wants to see more work from us, from our team. So I've been, as I said, Manny and colleagues, I've been rewarded with so many occasions, opportunities of seeing the consequence of our work in different ways.
This is really helpful because what you're saying, to me anyway, is that a good indicator of our being consequential is demand for more evaluations in certain areas. And that certainly is one. Ashwani, you've come back to evaluation after some time away. And as you've set up NDB, I mean, surely people have asked, if you're going to set up an evaluation unit, what would we expect out of it? How can you be consequential? What were your thoughts as you entered this new world?
Well, maybe I should start by saying that one of the biggest challenges we are facing in the evaluation office in NDB, and my colleagues are here as well, is building that evaluation culture across the institution. To be consequential, there has to be a culture of learning, assessment of results, accountability, impact-driven organization. So not that the bank is not open to these ideas, the NDB, when I mean the bank. There are many banks here, so I have to be careful. But you can imagine as a new organization, the focus is on commitment of new loans and new projects and programs, getting the money out in the initial phases. So that has been one of the biggest challenges. But I see openness to building a culture so that we as evaluators can become more consequential within the new development bank context. I think another important component of that is the self-evaluation function. That also needs to be sufficiently developed and strengthened to be able to induce that culture of change and consequence from independent evaluation.
I'm so glad you brought up this issue of the culture of learning, because I do think it's a question. And I wanted to ask both Marvin and Veronique, from what you see your organizations, what is that culture like in terms of learning from evaluation? When evaluees get results, are they receptive? What happens to them if they get a bad evaluation? Are they supported, or do they get clunked over the head in your organizations? Any reflections on this?
Well, definitely a culture of evaluation is something that you need to nurture. And I think first it needs to be based on mutual respect and credibility of your work. So I think that in a way, we can always blame the others for not taking on board the lessons or not learning, but originally what you have is to provide evidence analysis, findings, and recommendations that are solid enough and relevant enough that they are going to be used. So it's really important that you start with looking in your own background and making sure, or garden, and making sure that you deliver credible, quality, relevant information. And then, yes, of course, you need to have an audience, because the learning process means that you have also a culture of operations and management being ready to learn the lessons. It's something that needs to be built. My challenge, I would say, when I moved to EBRD was to be in an environment that's, of course, much more private sector oriented, which means that the majority of the staff are bankers, some of them not so familiar with the notion of evaluation, or also because the incentive is very much, as we're saying, it's disbursing the money. That's actually their responsibility, and the incentive they have is to disburse. And maybe for them, learning can be almost like a disruption. But it is for us to work with them to show how useful it can be. And it requires not just one action, but a multitude of action. It means working with them when you develop your work program in consultation to understand what topics could be of high interest to them. It means engaging as much as possible also with operation when you implement the evaluation. So it's, of course, we are independent, but independent doesn't mean isolation, as we often say, and that means we need to interact a lot. And that builds, it's very important, this interaction during the implementation, because it builds the ownership in a way, even though the result might be positive or negative. But then you also have to do your work at the end when the results are published and make sure that you disseminate the results, that the format is right, that you are using ways also of conveying your messages in a concise way, not too jargonic. So it's a whole process of making that happen.
And we'll come back to that, of what we can do as evaluators. But right now, Marvin, I'm still interested in this whole issue of what is the culture like for the receptivity to evaluation in your institution, especially as Ashwani put it, let's face it, we're banks. And that's perhaps the difference between the MDBs and the others, is we have to generate loans because it's an existential issue for the MDBs. Marvin?
Yes.
Is there a trade-off between this volume concern and the willingness to learn and adapt?
It shouldn't be a trade-off, but these organizations are geared towards approving more and more resources, right? So they tend to be biased towards approval. There's the approval culture is more prevalent than otherwise. It's up to you as an evaluator to have an influence, once again, being consequential. If your vision is to be consequential, you got to adapt your approach, because you're not changing the fact that the organization is geared toward approval. That's the nature of it. You cannot change that nature. So you got to adapt to that nature. And there are a number of things that you have to do over the years, right, that I've tried many things. As I was saying early on, learning to me is a fundamental component of our work, next to accountability with the same value. I tend to distinguish between two types of learning, one mandatory and the other voluntary. Right? Mandatory comes from the recommendations that management or whatever in the organization have to implement. There's no way, because I'm going to follow up on those recommendations. I will follow up. That's mandatory. You learn or you don't learn. You can also introduce mandatory learning through, as the Chinese system is, as we were explained today. If you don't perform well, then your resources are going to be transferred to another program. That's mandatory learning. It is difficult. It's not simple if you produce poor recommendations. Voluntary learning is more difficult. And there are a number of things you have to do. In general, I tend to stress the need to be strategic in what you do. It's not a matter of evaluating everything left and right, but be strategic. Be timely, because your work has to come at a decision point. If it doesn't come at a decision point, you miss the window and it's going to go to the shelves. Nobody is going to learn from that. The appropriate tone at the top has to be there. If the president and the board are not truly engaged in this to come back to the production line, it will not happen. It's not about you. You got to also engage this other actor. And finally, you got to engage from the beginning of your work. It's not when you finish your work and you want to disseminate it so that people learn. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't. You got to engage with the evaluees from day one. Day one, engage with them, understand their needs, and during the process of production of your evaluation work, you got to continue engaging with them. And when you finish, you got to continue engaging with them, prepare a nice program to disseminate, to continue talking with them, as we did under the direction of Veronique, thorough program of post-evaluation work. But that, without the engaging process during the production of your evaluation, doesn't make any sense.
I know Ashwani wants to follow up on this, but I'm just one observation is, I have 4 children. I try to raise them well, but I must admit, mandatory learning never worked. Ashwani, over to you.
No, just a quick, very brief follow-up to pick up where Marvin stopped about engaging and learning. I totally subscribe to what my colleagues have said, but I want to also highlight, based on my experience, the learning happens not only during the evaluation or at the end of evaluation, when you disseminate and engage, it happens over a period of time well beyond the evaluation. I have seen examples, and you can't force it down. And what happens is that management doesn't want to learn lessons necessarily that come from an independent evaluation outfit. So leave them alone for a while. And you will see that over time, they will react. They will build on what is being proposed. I have seen numerous examples like that throughout my career. One clear example was in my former job. We recommended my former organization, IFAD in Rome, to introduce a private sector lending window. It took them 10 years, but they did it. But at the time of evaluation, they opposed that recommendation. But they have done exactly what the recommendation said. So it does take time. It does take time, and at a certain point, you have to let them absorb it and take it forward themselves.
Another good example of that, as you remember, Marvin, was the climate change evaluation in which ADB's operations in coal was recommended to be stopped. And at first, there was resistance, and then basically it happened. Very similar example. Just a word to the audience. In about 5 or 10 minutes, I'll be turning to you for your questions, so please prepare them as we engage here in this panel. Veronique, Marvin and Ashwani have been talking about how when you have a system in which, if our theory of change is that we're consequential because we go through the board and the board tries to mandate actions to governments, even if we produce the best evaluations, it really depends upon what tools the board has to affect the incentives of management. As we know, boards change very quickly. Management tends to stay. And there may be ways for them to get around this. Any reflections on this point? The political economy of what happens in our institutions.
Yeah, and it is the right word. It's really a political economy approach, and it's something also that's moving. So you can't really say for any institution the culture of evaluation is there to stay. It's really a moving environment, and it really varies depending on the people. I think that there are two things. First, it's individuals, and second is the system itself.
Please explain.
Systemic first, it's having an institution where there is already a good governance system, where independent evaluation, first of all, exists. It has, where it has access to board members, where it is listened to by management, and has access also to operation and staff. That's more of the systemic way, and where there is a system where recommendations are agreed upon or disagreed upon, but if they are agreed upon, there is a system that monitors it to see whether there is an action plan. And in EBRD, and other MDBs, there is an action plan that the management needs to take. And then we follow up on the action plan and report, both management and independent evaluation report to the board on a regular basis to indicate whether it has been implemented. So that's the system. But the system in itself is not enough if you don't have individuals who really carry the weight of making it work and who really believe in the fact that independent evaluation can bring some additionality to the work. And that, of course, comes from the top management. We are lucky to have a president who also has experience from the Cour des Comptes in France and is very positive about the importance of evaluation in general and independent evaluation in particular. And then managers also who believe in evaluation. The most difficult part, I would say, is to ensure that you can reach out also to operations. And there are different ways of doing it, I suppose, but one way of doing it will be to build also capacity in evaluation. It's not to say that each person, each staff in EBRD would need to be an evaluator, but it would be important to strengthen the understanding of what evaluation is, why do we evaluate, and how it can be useful to their work. And second, it's apart from the evaluation capacity development, it's interacting and, again, as Marvin was saying, also engaging. So very often just going out to the different teams and telling about evaluation, why is evaluation important, what type of findings can be useful to you. That's the type of thing that we try to do. It's only if you work at those two levels, the systemic and then the individual human elements to it, that you can have a chance to have more consequences, I would say.
No, really important. And you brought up a new point, and that is that it's important to build capacity not only among evaluators, but on users of evaluation on how to use that. And I actually am not sure how many of those we have here. It's an interesting point. And I was wondering whether Marvin and Ashwani, you have any reflections on this? The whole
Absolutely, no. I mean, I'm thinking, of course, I mean, the nexus between the policymaker, the decision maker, and the evaluator is fundamental. You cannot be consequential if we are only talking among ourselves, preaching among the evaluators. This event precisely has been designed from day one as an interface between policymakers. There are many here who are the implementing agencies and are interacting with us evaluators. Being mindful about this interaction is what makes evaluation consequential. I'm not interested in writing for journals. I'm interested in that's for research, right? I'm interested in writing for changing things in our organization. I've been a researcher for many years too. I've done that. The type of research that we do here called evaluation is for it to have a consequence within the organization. It's not knowledge for knowledge. And so this interface is fundamental. And let me just say a word about this, the board that you said. Absolutely, this point that you made, Manny, is fundamental. And that is a reality. There's management permanently there, board that move in and out. But that's precisely what explains our existence. There is an asymmetric information between the principal and agent. You remember that, right? Principal, the board, the agent management. There is asymmetric information, and that's where we come in there. That's why you always have to, as an independent objective, it doesn't matter that it's in this type of organization, MDBs, and any other organization, you have to be mindful of the objectivity that you bring to the table with the purpose of bridging the gap of information between the principal and the agent. It is absolutely fundamental that you have this in mind when you produce your work and interact with both parties.
Before I turn to the audience, Ashwani, any reflections you have on this, the political economy, of how to manage our institutions and its learning culture?
Well, maybe just to build on what my colleagues mentioned, I think there are two different aspects I'd like to bring in, which is the issue of disclosure of evaluations. And I think I'm personally a big advocate for full disclosure, because through this full disclosure, then you can really induce and ensure call for action, even in a situation where board or management might not follow through. So in the NDB evaluation policy, we subscribe to full disclosure, although we are facing some challenges in that respect. The other dimension I would like to bring in, and I know this happens from time to time, but I would like to see this happening more often, is evaluators to engage further with parliamentarians, to hold our board members accountable as well for follow-up actions. Usually board members are representatives of government. And I think this is something that we should further strengthen in our work and engagement during evaluations, also to engage with parliamentarians and bring them on board in such processes.
Wow, well, we've actually touched on a great number of headlines here, even though we started off very well with timeliness and agility, but really have been talking a lot also about influence and why it is that we actually do these reports that we do and how do we hold ourselves to account. I'd now like to turn it over to you, the audience, for any questions and comments, observations. If you could keep it short and pointed, and if you have a comment to specific panelists, including myself, please point that out. So if we could, I cannot see a single person, so if we could turn up the lights, and then I will, please keep your comments short because we have a lot of people here. So I'll point to these two here and three. 1, 2, 3, and then we'll do a round. So the person at this table here, yes, you, in the red shirt. Is there a microphones? Please identify yourself and then pose your question.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Abhinash Das from Development Monitoring Evaluation Office, Delhi. So, very engaging and thought-provoking session, actually. So, my question is, basically, we are talking about agility, we are talking about good evaluations, but do they sometimes work at cross-purpose? If we become more agile, the quality of evaluation might suffer. So, how agile we should be, and what type of evaluations we should take up? And also, doesn't it also depend on the type of theme which we are trying to evaluate? Is it a social development scheme, or is it related to infrastructure, which has very clear outcomes? So which sector we are looking at, does that not also cater to the type of evaluation we take up? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think, Ricardo, I know you, but please identify yourself.
Thank you, Manny. So I'm Ricardo Palastro. I'm Chief Evaluation Officer at the World Health Organization. So you touched on this element on individuals and systems, right? I'm very interested, specifically considering that we have a chair and such a panel, on the role of leadership in making evaluation influential.
Wow, big question. Eric.
The role of leadership in evaluation.
Thank
being
you.
consequential.
Eric Bloom from IED at ADB. So I just want to make a comment about culture. So we were talking about the culture of our organizations, of our bank. But what about the culture of the evaluation groups? Like I've found that many of my fellow evaluators are rather conservative. They're happy to keep on doing the same things they've always done. Sort of the attitude is, it's not really broken, so we don't really have to fix it. And it just seems to me that as the world changes, maybe there's room for us to learn as well. So I'm just wondering if you collectively have any thoughts on that.
Okay, so thoughts about possible trade-offs between agility and quality, the role of leadership in evaluations themselves, and the culture of our evaluation groups. So, who'd like to start?
I could,
Veronique.
thank you. I could give it a try. Definitely, the tension there could be between rapid assessment and rapid work and quality of the work is something that's one of the challenge that has to be faced when you do a rapid assessment. I don't think that it's unmanageable, but it's definitely something we need to keep in mind, is they should not be compromised to the quality of the evaluation, even though you do it rapidly. So it doesn't mean that you have necessarily all of the data and information to have a full picture, but at least in the reporting, you can highlight the limitation that you are facing. I would always say, and that's kind of basic, but don't issue any finding if you don't think that it's based on robust methodology. So in that case, it's better to say that we couldn't find enough evidence to draw a conclusion. So yes, of course, it's a tension, there is a challenge, but at the end of the day, it's the credibility of our work that's at stake. So on my mind is that there should not be any compromise, even though you are doing it rapidly. You will have incomplete reports, of course, because you cannot look at everything, but what you say has to be based on information that you trust and is reliable. It doesn't mean that it won't change, because of course the world is changing and you might have more information, but at a certain time, that's the best you can do with the information you have. Leadership, I don't know if you're talking about leadership in an institution or leadership in an evaluation department, but I would respond that of course leadership matters. It's not the only thing that matters, but it does matter because it's a way also of sending the message. I was mentioning earlier that it's important to have a president that is interested in evaluation, that trusts evaluation, and that will also understand the necessity of having independent evaluation. So the message sent from the top is really important. If you have a head of an institution referring to evaluation or interested in looking at the key messages that evaluation is providing before any important meeting, then the message that it's sending is that evaluation matters, that it will be listened and that it's part of the decision making. The leadership.
Just quick follow-up on this. What happens if you have a leadership that is not so amenable?
Well, then you have to do double work in trying to reach out to those who are the champions. And I would say that's the best, but it's of course, it's ideal to have someone who is really pushing for it. If you don't have it, I would recommend to identify the champions in the institution, and that's where it is political economy, is try to identify those who can support evaluation, but also influence. If you have a diagram about level of influence and level of support, you need to reach out to those in the right top quarter where they both have the influence and the willingness to support. If you have some leaders or colleagues who are totally reticent to evaluation, I don't believe that you can change much. You can change a little bit, but they're never going to be fully supportive.
Thanks. Any reflections on the other questions or anything else?
Actually,
Shwan.
I'll leave Marvin to do the rest, but I just want to make one comment. You might
No,
on
please,
leadership,
please.
on leadership,
Please,
but
please.
to complement what Veronique was mentioning. Veronique spoke about leadership largely in management. I would like to comment on leadership and evaluation. Just to complement
I
what
was
you...
going to come to that, so that's good that you're taking it.
Okay. For me, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree, that the evaluation process is equally important as the evaluation report and the content itself. And for processes, you really need strong evaluation leadership. I think that is fundamental. And let me unpack that a little bit. You need leadership when you're actually designing an evaluation, in methodological, intellectual leadership. But it goes beyond that. You also need leadership when you're engaging with stakeholders, different audiences at the grassroots level, at the administrative level, at the policy level. So you really, evaluation leadership becomes fundamental. And most importantly, it is critical, and this will invariably happen during evaluation when you have a conflict. You need leadership to be able to do conflict resolution. So evaluation leadership is equally fundamental in addition to management leadership.
Thank you. Marvin.
Never compromise quality. Never. Agile doesn't mean bad quality. The work of an evaluator stands on the quality of the work that you're doing. A good example is the real-time work that we did in ADB. I was rereading these short papers that we produced, and they are absolute jewels. Eric is here. He was one of the key evaluators, him and Melinda. They did an extraordinary job. I was really impressed now that I was rereading the approach paper and each of the 3 notes that were produced with so much proficiency, with new methods, with adaptation to the circumstances. We couldn't go to the field. We looked for people in the ground. There was no low quality in that. It was agile, but it was not low quality. Otherwise, we would have never had the impact that I was talking about a moment ago. Not without controversies. You're always going to have controversies anyway as an evaluator, so be mindful, be thorough in the quality of your work. The second thing is on leadership. For God's sake, and when our organization is not working, the problem is in the head. I've seen it for over years and years, and I've seen organizations, departments falling because of a bad head, no vision, no managerial abilities, no capacity to execute. And I have seen organizations in the other extreme, right, thriving because of good factors in this sense. Yes, absolutely. Leadership on our side as evaluators, you got to have leadership. You got to understand where you're going. And you have to be able to trace that direction that you are trying to bring your team towards. Leadership fundamental. And to the question of room for change, that's precisely the purpose of this conversation, that we have to change our mindset, adapt to the new circumstances. This, Eric, you yourself were part of that change, of adapting the work that we do in evaluation and produce high quality, influential type of work because of that change of mentality. That, as we said this morning, we're not like a hospital for long-term care. with no emergency room. No, we do everything. We can do everything and contribute to the improvement of performance of our organizations.
Okay, let me take another round. Just one observation from my side on this very interesting conversation. And that's relating, I think, this issue of what do we do when there's not that receptivity on part of the leaders for evaluation. And this is where the issue of disclosure, Ashwani, that you point out is so important. That, as Megan reminded me earlier today, our ultimate beneficiary are the people themselves, and disclosing to them perhaps is one way when we have dyed-in-the-wool leaders, as might happen. Questions? Okay.
Hi, Karan Nagpal from ID Insight. I guess a meta question on evaluation is how do you, and this builds on Eric's point earlier, how do evaluation officers evaluate themselves? I think Ashwani and Marvin have spoken about, impact in terms of, the president was very happy with our work, he asked us to do things, Is that, if just those anecdotes could be considered to be selecting on, the observed variables, so it would be nice to hear from you, how do you think as evaluation office leaders critically about your own success and the challenges in that measurement as well, right? You have alluded to the fact that some of this impact is very long run. It may not have impact immediately, but 10 years later, yes. So are there systematic ways of tracking your own success or failure and learning from that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments from...
Hello.
Sorry.
Hello here.
Sorry.
Christoph David Weinmann of Protean Consulting. I like all of the discussion, and there are a lot of things I agree with and that I don't agree with. 2 points that I wanted to maybe draw your attention to is, one, I'm a little surprised as an external or as an independent evaluator who has been working both in institutions, both being evaluated and also evaluating, and doing that as an independent consultant, is that we seem to have the notion that evaluation is related to science. Yeah. Now, from my experience in leading many evaluations, I would say rather it's an art. Yeah. It's an art where I come in at a certain moment, to assess a certain situation where not everything that can be reflected in science and can be produced by scientific methodology is laid open on the table. So I have to draw on a lot of different registers and actually to be able to assess the proper situation, and sometimes I might even have to deal with falsified information, right? So just to maybe introduce a little modesty into the question on how much scientific our work is as evaluators, it's actually much more pragmatic, right? And it is an art much more than a science. Second point that I wanted to make is about disclosure. I understand that there is an interest in disclosure and that it's important to disclose information in order to be accountable to the public. But I should also caution everyone that the more you disclose, the less you will have cooperation in the field, because the amount of tremor that occurs with project teams, if they know that the results are going to be discussed in public, et cetera, should not be underestimated. And if you want to have a comfortable atmosphere, if you want to really have a learning situation from those evaluations, then probably disclosure can at some times be counterproductive. So maybe try to differentiate how much you disclose, right, or in which way you disclose in order to protect that space that we need when we do evaluation, that people are ready to come forward and talk about difficulties that you're actually facing in implementation.
Okay, great topics for further discussion. Yes, well, last one here, then we'll come to the team.
Good afternoon.
Yes, please.
I'm representing this pre-monitoring institution of the Maldives. I'm just wondering, when it comes to evaluation, could there be any role to the external auditors and also the internal auditors? Why I'm asking this question is when it comes to financing some development projects, the donors, development partners, they include sometimes a requirement for the external audit, sometimes performance aspect, sometimes compliance aspect in the donor agreements with the implementing agencies. But many a times it's not that clear. There's no clarity as to what should be reported in maybe an external audit or performance audit report also when it comes to these kind of projects. So I'm wondering, wouldn't it be a good idea for the donors to actually include some kind of guidelines or produce a guide for the external auditors and other auditors also when it comes to providing assurance on the project, yeah?
Thank you. And there was someone here.
Thank you. Thank you. All three of you, Veronique, Ashwini.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Sorry, my name is Archie Rastogi. I'm with the Green Climate Fund. Very, very rich discussion, and my question perhaps relates to the question that other colleagues raised. Veronique, Ashwini, Marvin, all of you talked about making real-time evaluations or making evaluations count and influential or making them timely. There can be a tendency to, if you work very closely with management, to make evaluations desirable. So on the one hand, they could be quite feasible, your recommendations, or on the other hand, quite provocative. Right? So to what extent is that a question of objectivity, a skill that you can learn, or is there a role for integrity then, a personal sense of like something that comes from the gut? And how do you find the balance between the two if you do come across that challenge when you develop those recommendations and those findings? Thank you.
Thanks. Why don't we stop here for now? And we have a rich set of topics, including how do we evaluate ourselves? Is evaluation a science and or an art? And the pros and cons of disclosure, role of auditors, and on integrity and communications. Marvin.
Me, I start.
You don't have to answer all of them, by the way, as long as the panel addresses
right.
So just pick and choose.
On who evaluates the evaluator and how we know that we're being effective or not. Well, at least the independent evaluation offices of all the MDBs have this periodic external assessment commissioned by the boards. And normally it should be around every 5 years. And this has been the instrument through which we have come to take the same medicine. I've done it. I have gone through the same medicine for a number of times in different organizations. Sometimes hard to swallow, right? But well, that's the medicine we provide to others. There is another trend that has been introduced in some of the departments, and it's the use of result frameworks for evaluation. We started doing that at the World Bank. We were the first one to introduce that. And some other organizations, a little bit reluctantly, have used this. And so that's a second instrument. And a third instrument that we have are the periodic surveys that test how we're doing. And we do this normally every 1 or 2 years to see what are the users of our evaluation think, including from the board, management, staff, external, etc. So there are a number of instruments. Evaluation as a science or not. By the way, yes, I'm sure you disagree. You wouldn't be an evaluator, right? If we agree on everything, evaluators would disagree by nature, right? I tend to think of evaluation more as Michael Scriven call it as a meta-discipline, like statistics, like ethics. Instead of calling it science or not science, we use scientific methods, right? That's true. We use scientific methods that come up from other disciplines, but our discipline is a unique one that I just described it. I like the way that Michael Scriven put it, and I subscribe to that notion. And just one last word. I'm sorry, Manny. On the auditors, but our work is different from the auditors, right? We're part of the control function of an organization that goes from research, which I have done, audit, which I have also done, evaluation, audit. Evaluation is between audit and research. and inspection when things go bad, right? I have done all these functions here, right? From the extreme of knowing because it's nice to knowing because something went wrong. That's the spectrum of control. And each one of them has their own responsibility. We are not auditors, although many auditors have been taking this function of evaluation. Right? But the auditor is about compliance. That's the fundamental responsibility of an auditor. It has been expanded in some cases, but our work is in between the two control functions of an organization. And do they nurture themselves? Yes, of course. All of them nurture themselves, and they all can and need to communicate with each other. Manny, you have
Shwani?
So I'll make two comments. One, I'll pick up on the topic of disclosure to clarify further or to develop that idea further. When I spoke about full disclosure, in our case, and what I believe is that there should be full disclosure of the evaluation analysis, evaluation findings, evaluation recommendations, and ratings if you use them. Now, surely we should be, as evaluators, we protect the source of key informants, don't attribute statements or feedback to individuals or groups or institutions. Be, of course, also cautious in disclosing information that might be part of a non-disclosure agreement, particularly for non-sovereign private sector operations and things like that. So I just wanted to clarify when I said full disclosure, it was related to the core of the evaluation analysis, results, and recommendations. Just to complement what Manny mentioned, what we are doing in the New Development Bank to evaluate ourselves, we do indeed have a results framework for our office approved by the executive, the board of directors, with 15 key performance indicators. It is a self-evaluation in a way, but anyhow, it is a step in that direction. And also what we do is for strategic evaluations, we will commission an external independent review of the quality of the evaluation, which includes the methodological quality of the evaluation, but also the evaluation analysis and direction. So there is someone who gives a comment, and that comment is also presented to the management, unedited, and to the board of directors. So there are some checks and balances that are in place.
Thanks. Veronique, especially in this issue also, if you could, on maintaining your integrity while communicating and engaging with management, which came up.
So you keep the difficult one. Thank you, Manny.
We all evaded it. No,
Yes,
no,
now
not true,
I
not true. No time, no time.
But, yeah. No, definitely, I'll come to that, but I will just say that I fully agree with what both Marvin and Ashwini was saying. For external evaluation, we had also in EBRD an external evaluation that was conducted 4 years ago. There is one that is planned for next year. So there are recommendations, and we implement the recommendations. And one of the recommendations was to have a result framework, similarly to what happened at ADB, actually. So we did develop a result framework with indicators not only of output of the independent evaluation department, but also trying to capture the outcomes. And very often, how do you capture these outcomes is through either surveys, and we conducted some, or capturing some evidence, more anecdotal, but evidence of how sometimes an evaluation has been influential. And each time during the year when I see something, when I see the president mentioning it or management mentioning evaluation, I ask my team to please keep that on the side, capture that so that at some point we will be able to tell the story, not from a quantitative but also from a qualitative perspective. And in the next annual report next year, we are going to have a special chapter looking at the results of the implementation of the recommendations, and which means also not being shy of looking at whether independent evaluation made the right recommendations. And for that to be fully transparent, we hired some high-level experts from outside so that they can really say what they want. So there are different ways for evaluators to be evaluated and to be accountable. On the art and science, and then ethic that goes with it. Definitely, as Marvin was saying, it is an art and it is a science. It is an art at the end, but it has to be based on scientific methodologies. I used to be, before I was in evaluation, I used to be in operation, but then at some point I was chief economist. And at that time, I could, of course, based on surveys and research, I could write a document where I was at the end giving my feeling about something, my opinion. As soon as I put the evaluator hat on my head, I forbid myself to doing so. When it's not an opinion that we give on an evaluation, it's an analysis of the evidence we get. Of course, there is always an element of subjectivity because objectivity doesn't exist. And of course, we look at the evidence through our own prism and maybe biases, but also our experience and our capacity, and that's where the ethic is important. We have to be strong in our professionalism and our capacity to not be biased, at least as an intention. There are always biases, but as soon as you start an evaluation, you need to make sure that you try to be as objective as possible. It's a work, because when we start with the approach paper or with conceptualization paper with a team, it's the meeting itself is a way to try to avoid being biased. So by having different perspective, different feedback, you try to open from the beginning, open your eyes and make sure that there are no blind spots that, or if you don't cover everything, at least you know what you're not covering. So it's, I think that's part of the ethic of being an evaluator, is making sure that you try to be as objective as possible, that you don't have any conflict of interest or personal biases before you start a research or implement an evaluation, and that you stay during the whole implementation, that you take the time on a regular basis to step back and think, okay, what am I doing? Am I really being objective in what I'm saying? Or am I trying to, for example, in interviews, are they leading questions? Or because I think I understood a point in the first interviews, am I now just looking for evidence that I'm right? It's really a process, and it's an intellectual probity, I would say, that you need to have when you're an evaluator. As, of course, it's in all professions, but I think as an evaluator, you have that even stronger, this responsibility.
No,
and that's why we have peer reviewers also.
Right, exactly.
It's important to have others from your team and then from outside telling you maybe what your blind spots are, or maybe giving you a different perspective on how you analyze the data. And I think that's key to quality control, is to have that check from inside and outside.
Just to add that sometimes we've been able to give the most difficult messages without a lot of controversy if we give them early. People don't actually are more receptive to messages, hard messages, if they're not surprised.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If they're surprised, even mild messages become very controversial.
Exactly.
And so that's why this engagement that we talked about, and doing that in a way that maintains your integrity, is something that needs to be done.
If I may just follow up on that, no surprise is very important. Before I was an evaluator, I used to work on public-private dialogues on reforms in different countries, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, in different places. And each time I would also tell the team is no surprise. Nobody wants a surprise, especially not in public or when you are already at the table negotiating. So exactly what you're saying, it's very important to start bringing the information.
Some evaluators love surprises because of the gotcha, but trying to avoid that is a trick. So one last round, any other questions, comments, and then we'll have to end this terrific discussion. Yes?
Hi.
Over
My
here?
name.
First over there, I think.
There's a lady over there.
In the middle?
Mani?
It's difficult to see.
Thank you. My name is Sheena Ali Mansoor. I'm representing Government of Pakistan. My question is, partially answered that there should be no surprises, but just wanted to have a question as to who should lead the evaluation process between the developing partners and the recipient, because usually when it comes to the process, during the process of evaluation, it either comes as a surprise or the problem of ownership, because in the public sector there are different segments from which we have to get the information, and also the problem of understanding the entire process. So if they're involved during the initiation of the evaluation, it would be more helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, back there, please.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Chung. I'm from Protean Consulting. Dovetailing on what you've said about no surprises, I wonder about the role of evaluation at the planning stage, especially in influencing management. You know, program management can very well plan with evaluation in mind, but I wonder, you know, why is this not prevalent in a lot of organizations?
Was not prevalent.
Thank you. Okay, one
Question is
last one.
evaluation in planning, in planning.
Anyone else? Okay, over here.
Programming. Strategy.
Thank you. My name's Dugan. I'm from the Global Evaluation Initiative. The panel has spoken a lot about future evaluation and how it needs to look in terms of when it gets done and how it happens. But there hasn't been that much reflection on who the evaluators of the future are, how we're growing them and what they need to be able to do. And there also hasn't been that much discussion on where evaluation needs to take place. In many instances in big MDBs, the evaluation function is centralized. It happens in one building. And I'm wondering if the panel has thoughts on where evaluation needs to happen and who needs to be doing it in future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I think this is a great set of, for our last round on who should lead evaluations and role of evaluation at the early stages in terms of planning, and then who are the evaluators of the future and where should they be? Who would like to start? Marvin.
Well, first on to emphasize this point of no surprises that have been recognized by everyone. Definitely, there is nothing more tedious, I think, in evaluation that using this approach of that Manny called the gotcha approach. Never do that. That's an absolute no-no for a good evaluator. If you want to destroy an organization and destroy your department of evaluation as well, practice that. If you want to construct and be part of an improvement of your organization, engage. No surprises. No one likes to be surprised. No matter how people say that they like evaluation, no one likes to be evaluated. That's the reality. And so don't surprise people. Tell them whether it's good news or bad news in advance. Where should evaluation take place? I think Ashwani mentioned two dimensions of evaluation. It should take place where people can self-assess themselves. So that means mostly on the ground, is management, is wherever is best to be produced. Self-assessment is important because it's an instrument for learning and contributes to this point of no surprises. When you evaluate yourself and then I validate what you have done, it makes a huge difference. In one organization, I had a huge problem because it was only me evaluating them independently until I persuaded the CEO to build a self-evaluation system, and the situation changed dramatically. They did so. So self-evaluation wherever is best to be produced. An independent assessment. You definitely need independent assessment because everyone is great. When you assess yourself, everyone is fantastic. There was one organization that through a major MDB, through self-evaluation, they were being 100% effective, 100% effective. Nobody would believe that. But they were even disclosing this information. It was amazing to see, right? So you need, besides self-evaluation, you need to place anywhere in the organization an independent assessment to validate what people are saying, that the way that they are performing. Is the most effective way that I've seen evaluation is the two systems working at the same time that produce, to me, the most effective results, because you can cover a broader ground in organizations. Let me stop there so that I can give space to my colleagues.
Veronique?
Okay, yeah, definitely on the who needs to lead the evaluation process, I would say you have to distinguish between self-evaluation and independent evaluation. As Marvin was saying, self-evaluation is really important. It's really key, and that's really contributing to a learning culture and a culture of evaluation. If it's supposed to be an independent evaluation, then, of course, the first no is that the evaluee would assess itself, or that there will be, you'll have to check that there is no conflict of interest. You have to make sure that it's either at the municipal level or country level or external or MDB level, that the evaluators don't have any interest in going one way or the other in the type of findings that they find. So there is no rule as who should evaluate, but there is a rule of how to evaluate. That means making sure that you consult, that you interview people at the grassroots level, that there are field visits. And that's why it was so difficult to have evaluation during the COVID crisis. It's because we all know as evaluators that there is only a percentage that you can capture from reading or from interviewing remotely. It's very important that you go to the ground. You were saying that also meet with people and start engaging to have more information about the context and the real feeling of the people that were supposed to benefit from the activity. There was a question on influencing management. I'm not sure whether it was about how we influence management. What I can say is that what Marvin was talking about earlier, you have the mandatory learning and then the voluntary learning. Mandatory means making sure that the recommendations are implemented and that the management in that case has to develop an action plan that will respond to the recommendation, and not just a light one. It needs to be one that will meaningfully respond to the recommendation. And we regularly comment on the action plan developed by management, and what we look for is to make sure that there is a genuine intention to respond to the issue that was identified and to the spirit of the recommendation. And then the recommendation itself needs to be well documented with evidence, but also needs to be clear enough that there is no misunderstanding about the meaning of it and the intention. And it needs to be also actionable to make sure that you are not providing recommendations that are maybe wishing for golden standards that is actually not actionable and not realistic. And in this way, you can influence management. The rest of it will be more for management if they want to be influenced. That means if they are receptive to evidence and if they trust your evidence, if they think it's credible enough. And it may happen right away, or it may happen in months and years. And that's why, as you were saying, sometimes the learning doesn't come right away. It comes later on, but at least it's a seed. And then it can be nurtured by other evidence.
Shwani, there were two questions, I think, that remain unanswered, and that's who should lead, development partners or the recipients, and the capacity of evaluators themselves.
Yeah, let me start with the second one, which is, I think the specific question was, who are the evaluators of the future and the role of the central evaluation offices? So, in my opinion, evaluation is not the privilege of central evaluation offices, and evaluation in the future should really be an activity which is embedded in all our processes so that we learn collectively, individually, for improvement and transformation. Of course, the central evaluation units have a role, as Marvin was saying, to do independent assessments from time to time. But more concretely, and maybe this is more of a vision, who are the evaluators of the future? I personally really wish we can leap into the future and have a much greater role for the beneficiaries of projects and programs to do those evaluations that are currently done by the policymakers, by the project managers, by the evaluation officers. The final point, I think the question was who should lead evaluations, whether it is local stakeholders or... I think it builds on the previous comment I made. I don't think it's one or the other. Evaluations and monitoring and evaluation should be built into programs, and that is what we call self-evaluation. And this should be led totally by local stakeholders. Of course, the international organizations can provide technical assistance and methodological advices from time to time, but those evaluation processes should really be done by local stakeholders. Whereas when an international organization does an independent assessment, local stakeholders should be involved right from the beginning in designing the evaluation and providing inputs and commenting on the reports without compromising on the independence of the analysis. Thank you, and over.
So we're almost out of time. Last 20 seconds to each of you. We have a terrific audience here. We have evaluators, policymakers who are users of evaluation. Any messages for them for evaluation for the future in the last 15 seconds? So, Veronique, can I turn to you first?
Okay, a few seconds.
15 seconds.
The message will be to trust evaluation as a means to bring up some changes and improvements, and to make sure that evaluation is used not as a tool, but really as a tool with the intention to improve the impact. And impact is the key word, is, okay, what impact are we having, and how do we measure this impact? And that's going to be especially important as we are in this climate crisis. And I think that needs to be on our mind all the time. What impact are we having?
Thank you. Marvin.
Well, I would leave the same message with which I started. Strive to be consequential. There's money that is being invested in the work that we do. Make it worth it and have an impact in your organization. Prepare for the new challenges that we have ahead, climate change, poverty. We continue striving with poverty. We have a multiplicity of crises looming there. Be prepared for that. Adapt your methods so that you continue to be influential in your organizations.
Thanks. Ashwani.
Very brief. I think, again, probably repeating what the panel has said, I think it's very important that we evaluators should be constructive, have a constructive mindset. We should really be objective in our analysis and be honest in our evaluations. It's not easy because when you're honest and objective, you have to bring out the truth, and sometimes even if you try to minimize surprises, it's not easy. But I'm sure if you are constructive, have a constructive posture, you will achieve the desired change that we're looking for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. So you heard it here. In evaluation used at AEW, make a difference, is what everyone seems to be saying. Got some great lessons from them, how to do that, and how to measure it. Are new projects taking on board our lessons? Is there more demand for our services as evaluators? Are we building a culture of learning in the institution? Are we able to work with our institutions regardless of whether top management is sympathetic or not? And are we able to build the capacity, not just of our own evaluators, but those who are going to use it? And I hope the rest of this conference will help answer some of these questions. So please join me in giving our panel a great hand of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great.
That was great. This was great. Great. Meeting with you.
Thank you. Really good. Thanks a lot, man.
Um,